Research Talk. In our previous video, we started our conversation on data analysis in qualitative research, and we will continue our conversation in this video as well. In our previous video, I explained what a code is and how does it look like in actual when you code the data. If you remember, I briefly talked about one issue, which is the process of coding in qualitative research is not an exact science. What I mean that if I have an interview transcript, and let's say if it is being coded by two different researchers, are the codes being generated by two different researchers is going to be exactly same? No, it's not going to be exactly same. And the reason is the process of coding is not exact science. It's a little bit, it has subjectivity involved. Further, the process of coding is an interpretive act. So what is happening, I'm looking at the data, I'm reading the transcript, and then I'm interpreting it. So the act of interpretation includes some subjectivity. The reason why I'm explaining this to you, because I have seen that novice researchers, new doctoral students who are starting their journey on qualitative research, learning how to code, they get anxious because they're like, oh my God, if I'm coding it this way, is that the right way? Or if I use a particular code for a particular excerpt, is that correct? Or if it's not correct, it's not matching with my instructor's code. So the one thing I want to tell all of you is it's a subjective process. It's not an exact science, and you learn it as you do more and more coding. So it takes time as you immerse yourself in the data. As you start the process of coding, you learn and get better at it. So have patience and trust yourself. Thinking about the coding process, one thing that I want to highlight here is the way we code the data as a researcher can be influenced by some factors. The one is the researcher's lens. So what I mean here is, let's say if I'm conducting a study where I'm using feminist theory as interpretive framework, as a research design, or let's say if I'm using critical theory as my research paradigm or framework, the way I'm going to look at the data is going to be influenced by these frameworks. For instance, if I'm using critical theory, I'm going to look, when I'm reading the data, when I'm going to code the data, I'm going to be more mindful of focusing on what are systemic barriers, what are some issues at the level of society which are influencing the participant experience. So while reading the data, while coding the data, I'm more focused on understanding social dynamics, understanding social practices which may perpetuate the experience that this participant is sharing. So a researcher's lens, interpretive framework can influence how you code the data. Another factor that can influence coding is coding type. How you your strategy of coding. And there are various strategies. We will learn more about those in upcoming videos. So for instance, if I'm doing in vivo coding versus if I'm doing descriptive coding, or let's say if I'm doing process coding, these are various methods of coding. And based on my coding strategy, my coding method, my codes might look different from another researcher. So the codes that we generate may differ based on a researcher's interpretive lens as well as the strategy that a researcher is adopting for coding process. So that's briefly about this thing which I wanted to highlight, that coding is an interpretive act. Uh, it includes subjectivity. Another important thing to understand is how the journey of a code looks like. And the reason I want to share is because once you understand the lifespan of a code, you get a better sense of this process, this methodology that qualitative researchers use to analyze the data. So let's understand journey of a code. So firstly, let's say that here is data. Let's say it could be an interview transcript, could be an observation data, it could be my research journal data, it could be a document, maybe a government report, maybe uh, a digital data, maybe some participants' account, social media account. So this is the data. As a qualitative researcher, when I start coding, so let's say you generate codes, and let's say this is my initial round of coding, and I'm creating these codes from the interview transcript, from field notes, from um, document analysis. So these are initial codes which are emerging from my initial first round of coding process. In the next round, what we do, we see how these codes, which might be, let's say, in one study, typically you may have codes between 50 to 200 plus codes. I'm just giving you a hypothetical sort of normal numbers of codes that we see in a qualitative research, somewhere between 50 to 200 codes. So initial round of coding, you come up with 50 to 200 codes. Now in the second round of coding, you do see, you try to focus on how these codes, uh, can these codes be merged together? Some of the codes together can be clubbed together because they are talking about similar thing, similar process, similar construct. So in the second round, you come up with codes, but obviously they are not 5200 codes because they are less, because you have merged these codes which are similar in nature. Now you have some less number of codes. So let's say now you got with somewhere between 20 to 40 codes. Next, what happens with these codes, you develop categories. So let's say category 1, category 2, and category 3, category 4. What is category? Category, in simple language, it means that you try to see these broader codes and how they are distinct from each other or maybe related in some way or maybe part of a big process. So you try to see and club these in even broader frame, and that we call it category. So here you see in the third level, we have 4 categories which are emerging from the data. Now these categories can come up with themes, right? So theme 1, theme 2. So let's say so the categories leads to themes. Themes is like overall theme emerging from the data, or theme, or you can say the process. And finally, these themes or process can lead to a theory, a framework that you develop based on the data that you have collected. So these two will lead to a theory, a grounded theory, or a framework that you develop. So that's the flow of a code. That's a life journey of a lifespan of a code. So this is your initial data, your interview transcript, your field notes, your observation data, your documents, whatever data you choose to analyze as part of your qualitative study. And this is, so from this data, you do the initial round of coding. So these are the codes. And in a usual qualitative project, we have like somewhere between 50 to 200 codes that come from the data. And then you look at these codes and see how many codes are maybe similar and can be clubbed together. So you do another round of coding where you club codes together because of their similarities, and then you come up with more focused code. And obviously they are less in number, as you could see here. And then you look at these broader codes and see how they are related, how they are explaining the phenomena. And then you come up with broader categories. So here you see 4 categories. And categories leads to understanding, analyzing the themes which is emerging from the data. And obviously the themes or these processes leads to final product is like a theory, a framework grounded in the data. So that's briefly the journey of a code. The reason why I'm explaining this, so that when you start coding, you know, like I'm creating these codes and how they are going to look like in future iteration of data analysis in qualitative research. So in this video, let's do a recap. We talked about the interpretive nature of coding process. So if you are a new researcher, I can understand like it's a bit anxious, anxiety to code the data, like how is it going to come up? But it's a subjective process, not completely subjective, but it has subjectivity involved, interpretive process. And you learn as you do more and more coding, you get better at it. And as I said previously, the code, how we code the data can be influenced by our interpretive framework that we are using for our research and the coding strategy that we are adopting. And finally, we talked about the journey of a code in this video. I'll see you again in next video talking about qualitative data analysis. See you then.